Welcome everyone to a gameplay overview of Superpower 2. Superpower 2 is a geopolitical simulator. It puts you in control of a nation, not really a president for reasons I'll show you later, but you kind of control an entity, a nation, and it gives you access to the politics, the military, and the economic stuff for whatever nation you've chosen. And we'll showcase that a little bit more. So let's jump into a new game. The only real way to play this game is as a sandbox. We'll see that there are some options you can choose as far as setting goals for yourself. But basically, if you're not playing this as like a simulation or a what-if scenario type generation, you're probably not going to have fun with this game for very long. So if you know the country you want to pick, you can just select it immediately. Or if you want, you can choose a profile. So if you wanted a really crappy government and high military, you can get North Korea. There she is. Probably also, if you increase the economy, you can get Iran and Russia. But for this game, we're actually just going to stick with the greatest raw potential and the best starting conditions, which is as the US. So this is actually it. We're looking here at the game map, which I think is a good indication of how realistic this game attempts to be. You'll notice that the day-night cycle is not actually linked to the day-night cycle of the game, because we have it paused, and that just continues ad infinitum, but it's still kind of fun. It feels very realistic, and this deals away with that problem that many games suffer from, where the 2D map has this stretching issue. The distance around the world is much smaller at the North Pole than it is at the equator, which a lot of games on a 2D map can't generate correctly. But this game doesn't have that problem because we're actually modeling it as a 3D entity. So here we are, we're in control of the United States. I'm actually going to set a different thematic map. We could do Empire, which shows our allies. We get their diplomatic relations with them. Apparently we're not in such good shape with the Netherlands, but the best one for me, in my opinion, is to look at diplomatic relations. So we can see the different relations the US has with other countries, or by picking any other country. For example, if we want to see how Great Britain is doing with the rest of the world, we just click on them. This is the problem with the 3D map. Sometimes you can't click exactly where you want. There you go. And it's more or less the same. It looks like Iraq hates them a little bit less. And that's about it. So Iraq hates us quite a bit more. And Iran definitely doesn't like us. No surprise there. This is 2001. So you are allowed to choose any of the United Nations recognized 193 nations that at least existed in 2001. This is based on the CIA fact book and UN data from 2001. So let's go ahead and pull out the meat and potatoes of this game, which is your three categories. I said politics, economy, and military. The main focus of this game is probably the economy, and when you want to go to war, that'll switch over to military. There's actually a very small focus on the politics side of things. And why is that? Well, it says here multi-party democracy, and the only lose condition for this game is when the next election comes. If you don't win, you actually lose the game. That's the only way that I've found that you can actually lose. Otherwise, they allow you to do whatever you want and continue the sandbox simulation. But it's really hard to lose, and on top of that, the politics does not model, so this is more like a democracy type game. If you're familiar, for example, with Democracy 3, then you don't actually have to pass things through the Senate or through Congress, through Parliament, what have you. Whatever you say just goes. So if I choose to increase spending in a very radical manner, the country just toes into line. Now, the only thing that is reflected as a reaction to that is this approval rating. And that's the primary metric by which the game chooses if you are successfully elected in the next election. But I've never found approval to be a difficult thing, and we can see that you can actually just declare martial law, or if I get into internal law here, I could just choose to make the Democratic Party illegal, and then everyone has to vote for me, a la what happens in Cuba right now. Okay, but aside from that, the politics window is pretty minor. The other things that you could do is actually adjust in kind of a what-if scenario, like what if. So the United States has actually already legalized gay marriage for the most part. So it's not such a cut and dry issue because there's state rights versus national rights, but basically this could be changed to permitted. And how this impacts the game is your internal laws give you an ideological marker, left or right. Are we left-winged? Are we right-winged? And that one is compared against other countries. So Canada is more left of us. Spain is probably more left of us. And our diplomatic relations with other countries generally improves a lot faster with countries that have very similar laws to us, which makes sense. And in this way, you can kind of get different blocks of nations. So for example, nations where things are, I don't want to say a little more backwards, but different than the United States at least, and uniformly different. So a lot of these countries will have the same internal politics, but they're very different than what the United States has. That allows these nations to stay a little more diplomatically united, and also keeps diplomatic relations a bit strained with the United States. So that's the game mechanic. But anyways, I don't think there's much more to talk about with politics other than I'm going to go into treaties. And although this is probably more under the economic wing, it's listed in politics, so we'll talk about it here. The game actually tries to model all the different international treaties, all the different... There's the International Monetary Fund here. There's... where is she? There she is. And the World Trade, the World Health Organization. All these things are modeled into the game, or attempted to be modeled into the game in some manner. So they have all these treaties that are... so we have an alliance with Micronesia. NATO's in here. And it's pretty interesting. You can create numerous types of treaties. For example, one of the treaties I want to get rid of is this economic embargo on Cuba. In this game, unless you, for role-playing reasons, want to leave it, there's no real reason to keep this. And all of these treaties, you do pay money. So there's especially this one called economic aid. And this means that the people on the left are basically giving money to the people on the right to help them succeed. So you can see there's a description there. But because the US has this massive budget issue, we should probably consider leaving a lot of these. Just so we don't, we gotta look after our own first, right? Okay, so that probably segues us very smoothly into the economy. I'll open up the main budget window. We'll get the game running so we can kind of see how our changes are impacting things as we go. And true to form, the United States has a massive deficit. I guess I'll kind of walk through some of the strategies I use for balancing budgets with any country, but in particular, of course, with the United States. And that'll be part of the gameplay overview. It's just an overview of this. This is probably, I would say, the main window of Superpower 2. It kind of defines everything, because we have the military upkeep. You have this security thing, which is, it's not very important, but it does model all the CIA type stuff here. You can do covert actions, like a coup in a different country. Anyway, it's not super important though. And this is the diplomacy window I was talking about. I think it's overspent right now. So the budget will probably reduce this to about 17 billion, I would say, as soon as the next game tick happens. I think we should be moving. Yeah, we are. Alright, so let's take a look at this and figure out what we need to do. Well, one thing, if you have a question about any item on the game, you can just hold F1 over that. So we'll hold F1 over propaganda. It turns out that propaganda is not so useful. It increases your approval rating, but at the cost of diplomatic relations with other countries. So it really doesn't serve a purpose, and when we hit this check mark, you're actually going to see that our 62.4% approval, well, it didn't really take a dive, did it? In fact, our approval's currently going up for reasons I'm not exactly sure about. Let's slow this down. Maybe this is too quick. Now, how are we going to balance this budget? Well, we're just going to have to cut spending. It's just what needs to happen. Hint, hint, the United States. No, I have no idea about what will actually solve the deficit problem with the United States in real life. We're just dealing with a model here, but based on the model that we're given, this is one way of saving the country. So we'll cut research down to about half. We'll be able to raise that later, but the main expenditure, as we see, is this healthcare. I'm going to cut it down by quite a bit, from 462 to almost half, 240. I mean, it could be, I could have done a little bit less, a little more. I didn't have any target reason. We just need to cut it so that we can save a little on, or decrease the deficit. Now, that's already a huge blow to the deficit. We've cut it down to almost 2/3 of its original. What else can we do? Probably cut government spending a bit. And now we really are like to 1/3 of the original deficit. And now this hasn't updated yet. We could just cancel, just close the window without applying, but we hit this check mark and this is the real time you see it updates. Okay, good. How does debt actually model in this game, by the way? I should mention that you can see debt payments are simply 10% of your current debt per year. So the faster we get that paid, the better. It's just this is 100 billion that we're paying to thin air. That doesn't help anything in our country. This also leads to the kind of death spiral where if you have high debt, you have high debt payments, and then your deficit increases, which increases your debt, which increases your debt payments, which increases your deficit, and the loop continues until you have to declare bankruptcy, which I think, now that I remember, is only the second way you can actually lose the game is if your country goes into bankruptcy. That is the second way you can lose. Okay, so we've seen that we've done a lot of work on the deficit, but it's not positive yet. At this point, I would encourage all libertarians or small government, like people who are for a small government, please look away, avert your eyes, because I'm about to do something which you're not going to be a big fan of. I'm going to raise the personal income tax to 60%. The game even tells me that this is insane, don't do it, but we'll hit okay anyway. And voila, the surplus, we now have a $400 billion surplus rather than originally almost a $700 billion deficit. So we've swung the budget by about $1 trillion. Other things to note on the economic health is they have some of your, let me actually pull up this window here. So I'm going to leave this in the bottom. This is just the notes of everything that's going on in the world. You can see that when we raised personal income tax, it appears as a note for the whole world. So you can kind of follow along what the other countries are doing in the bottom if you'd like. You can just, if I'm talking and it's boring you, just look and see what's going on in the world. Now we've raised personal income tax, we've balanced the budget, we will begin to decrease our debt instead of increasing it, which is great. Another thing is this interest rate. So inflation is modeled. If your economy is booming, inflation increases, and interest rate kind of controls that. Now, it's a little confusing to me. Inflation does not seem to work when your economy crashes. We know like from cases of like Greece, Argentina, that actually really bad economic health can lead to super high inflation as well. But just living in the mechanics, the economic mechanics that this game has modeled for us, we just need to realize that controlling the inflation is important. We'll just F1 on interest level. It says when the country's economic health gets too high, the inflation increases, causing your budget spending to increase. In raising the interest level slows down the economy, reducing the economic health, which helps control inflation. They recommend an interest level of around 2%. Inflation level around 2%. Well, we can see that because my economy is starting to boom, I'm already at a much higher inflation, which is probably true to form, increasing all my expenses. Now, although our goal is to balance this budget, there are a few things that we want to actually increase. Currently, we are spending $12 billion on tourism, and we're getting about $8 billion back for that. What I'm going to do is hyper increase this tourism because it's a really minor thing, and if we can end up gaining more out of the tourism market than we end up spending, that would be nice. Consider this like a short-term investment for long-term gains, which I'm not sure actually will happen, but the amount we're spending is minor enough that it's fine for us to experiment. Another thing I'm going to increase, actually a few things, is if I F1 on infrastructure, we can see that this increases resource production. Well, that's good. So I'm actually going to increase infrastructure. Same thing with environment. This increases the production of the primary sector, which we'll go into in a second, so we'll increase that. And lastly, we're going to increase education, which is going to help the services category, which happens to be the main contributor of the United States GDP. Okay, I'm actually going to also increase telecom. So if I go to this more info here, just to kind of explain what's going on with the red and the green, if you're in the exact middle, you're trying to keep these things more or less the same. Green is obviously an attempt to increase infrastructure or telecommunications, whereas red means you're going to start losing. The exact middle should be more or less maintaining the status quo. Okay, so this is how the United States is doing. You can see our development level, obviously enough, is much above the world average. And there are those human development collaborations, which we saw in the treaties, and those do help increase the overall world level. And one of your goals can be just to to make the world a better place overall, increase the world's human development level average. So now that we've done all this, we can see that there's going to be a slight decrease to our overall surplus, but it's still a great surplus. And we can do a few more things to decrease that budget. First of all, we are experiencing a bit of a decrease in corruption, and we're definitely decreasing that debt, so this should increase. Lastly, how are these changes going to be affected? Well, if we go over to this trade window, this resource window, it's going to be a little overwhelming, and I'm not even going to be able to, in the scope of this video, explain everything that's going on here. Very briefly, I just want to say that the sum of your GDP is broken down into all these different resource categories. So the services, which we saw education helps, the primary sector, which includes cereals, vegetables and fruits, etc. So all these things are actually modeled into the game, the various aspects of your GDP. Where does it come from? Those are pretty, intensely, I would say, complicated, or not so complicated, just very detailed. There's a lot of categories here that you can play with. Just to kind of understand let me just look at vegetables and fruits just to explain this briefly. You have a production window, which is how much the US is producing, consumption, which is how much your people desire to produce. You can see that we're at about 115 billion deficit between production compared to consumption. And we're only able to trade for 113 billion of that, so we're at a small balance negative. What does that mean? Well, if the people cannot actually produce everything that they want to consume, they have to go to this world market. If you produce more than you consume, you give to the world market. You sell your goods to the world market. Now, if you're not able, the people who buy from the world market first are, in each category, the people with the highest market share. So highest market share goes first, then second, and third, etc. One way you can counteract that is in treaties. If you have an economic partnership, I believe that you establish a local market before you go to the global market. So that means that the United States, in a treaty with Great Britain, would buy their surplus vegetables and fruits, for example, before Great Britain sold the rest of their excess produce to the world market. Just an example, I'm pretty sure we're not actually buying vegetables and fruits from Great Britain, but just an example. Now, you can control this. You can turn the government to management, or you can just make certain things legal or illegal. You can also encourage production by decreasing the sector tax. That means that, again, this is kind of a short-term loss for long-term gains. When I do my min-max super OCD playthroughs of the United States, I generally drop the sector tax down to 5% for everything, which highly encourages production. And then when, in about 2010, the world market kind of stabilizes, which is not correct, but it's just what happens in this game, then I can raise the sector taxes back up a bit more. Okay, but anyways, this also allows you to play with those what-if scenarios, like what if the US made drugs legal and just highly tax them? We can actually experiment with that here. So we've done it, we've made drugs are now legal, and we've raised taxes on them. So you can experiment with all those things. The trade window basically is for multiplayer, but you can, if you want to squeeze a little bit more out, do some technology trading. I find that this is pretty useful actually. So let's just grab Brazil, and we're going to ask them for money actually. And we'll sell them, let's say, naval gun precision level 4. 97 billion is the asking price. We don't think we'll actually get that much, so let's just try to get about 1/3 of the cost in billions. We propose, we're at negative 677, we propose, and they accepted, so we drop down to negative 628. So we can see here, whoops, not more info, but the messages, the trade has been accepted. But besides helping your debt situation by selling some technologies, because we don't really care if Brazil has that or not, the trade window is pretty multiplayer only, because nobody's going to buy Alaska for 22 trillion. Nobody has that amount of money. Okay, so last thing is the military. This is another way of actually saving your budget a little bit too. So I'm going to keep this over here so that we can see what's going on with our unit upkeep. It started at 167, but because of inflation, we're already up to 173. First thing I'm going to do is actually merge everyone. with this unit, which is going to send all my land units. It's going to complain that my sea units can't go on the sea. That's fine. But it's going to send all my land units, and we'll also get our naval units to move. And you can see the budget increased to 200, and it should drop back down. That's because of the readiness stat, which I'll show you in a second. So we're back down to 173. It jumped up to 200, and it'll jump up again as these guys get ready. You can see they have Z's here, and now the Z's will go away. They'll get the thumbs up. That means that they're basically transitioning, and we're here at 205, and it'll drop back down as these guys once again go into Z mode. So now back to Z. I abstract this as just the difference between like reserve force and active force, where active forces cost a little bit more to maintain, so there's a higher unit upkeep. Okay, so now that we've actually covered that, we'll actually go back to the budget and we'll increase our research and hit check, because things are doing good and we want the United States to be the military technological leader that she is. Let's step over to research and see how that money is being spent. The game breaks down the military aspect for every category, like ground, air, naval, into 10 categories. Gun, including range, precision, damage. Missile, with the same 3, including payload, which is how many missiles you can fire. Speed, sensors, armor, stealth, and countermeasures. Now, the stealth and countermeasures are not modeled in the ground, and obviously for strategic, you only have these 3 categories with the missile. So you can choose how to spend your money. This game actually allows you not just to set the research tab, but break down where that money is actually being spent. So if for some reason we were deciding we're going to need naval supremacy, maybe we'll cut a lot of the ground and air forces and really cut strategic, because we don't anticipate needing to nuke anybody anytime soon, for a much higher spending in Navy. Even inside of Navy, we can choose. We can see that this is our current technology. 1 is probably about World War II technology, whereas 5, 4, and 5, maybe like 4.5 is modern technology, the current state of the art. So it allows you a lot of room for growth. Units which are 777, whatever, are extremely powerful. And I don't even remember if I've ever gotten to level 10 units. The game has always ended before then. Now anyways, you can see the progress with the current research amount that we're spending, which is a lot, and with our allocation to naval, which is much higher than the others. This is the amount of days it'll take for us to jump from the current technology tier to the next one. This is influenced also by the financing. If for some reason we really wanted our gun damage to go up, we could do this, hit check, and we go to progress. Now all these things are going to change because I've changed the budget, but we should see that more than anything, gun damage is going up faster than gun precision, and we see that that's the case. Gun range is lower just because it's at a lower tier right now, so of course it's going to take less days to research an easier technology. That's enough about that. Let's go into actually how that works. It works as a unit design. So I'm going to go to tank because there's some funny artifact here. For some reason, as we'll see later, the US is still employing the M4 Sherman, which doesn't look exactly like that, but we're still employing M4 Shermans in our land forces. Like I said, tier 1 is more or less World War II technology. We can see the Sherman is basically all ones. Now that means it's a bit cheaper, but still, I mean, I wouldn't recommend building the M4 Sherman. What we could do instead is build the M1A2 Abrams, which, although this isn't quite right. I don't know if it would take $1 million to build a Sherman, but if it takes $1 million to build a Sherman, it sure as heck doesn't take only $4 million to build an Abrams. But that's fine, the higher technology is modeled as a more expensive unit. Now, one thing I've noticed just off camera, well, I guess we can actually go here, is for some reason the US does not have any corvettes. I don't know why, it's just happened that way. We have frigates, the Oliver Hazard Perry class. We have everything else, destroyers, plenty of destroyers. Now, if you want to decrease your budget in the beginning, one really sensible thing to do, it's going to sound crazy, is actually to take your units. Let's go to all again. I'll just sort by upkeep. If I just take my, I don't know, the top ones that have upkeep over $2 billion a year, I'm going to sell them. That sounds crazy, but look at the budget decrease. Unit upkeep has dropped from, whoa, I mean, it's dropped down to 38 for some reason, which is insane. So that's wonderful. If we hit sell again, they'll go back to ready to deploy, and we'll see, okay, for some reason unit upkeep has been cut by half, but I don't understand why. Just a weird artifact that the game has suddenly given us. Now, maybe that means that some of our units were bought, because you may think it's crazy to be selling like your our attack. What do we have? What happened to my... We had submarines and now they're gone? Did somebody buy them? No, here they are. So yeah, so our Los Angeles class nuclear submarines, they're available. People could buy them if they want. But first of all, nobody's going to buy them. They're really expensive, and most people, as we're going to see right here, are struggling when it comes to the economy. So this balance is slightly positive, but they're negative overall in debt. And here's negative balance. So deficit and debt, deficit and debt, deficit and debt. So a lot of these people aren't going to be interested in buying goods anyways. All right. So our upkeep is dropped because we merged all our units, which put them all into reserve forces, and now we've put some of them for sale, which can just save you. And nobody's going to buy those. Even if they did, you just wait to get better technology and you build better units. How do you do that? Well, let's design our own Corvette. I'm going to name this the Tortuga class. Why not? And we'll just give it I would say the best technology. Nothing but the best for Tortuga. And let's go ahead and confirm this. Well, actually, I want to change the design. I want to make it a modern look, so let's give it something a little more modern. That's kind of... Yeah, I like that. Okay, so confirm. We have our Tortuga class. It's somewhere in there. How do you build things? Well, you go to build. We'll go to naval. We'll go to corvettes. There's all these different classes. Now, ours is a bit expensive, but it's the best. So we'll leave it on high priority, and I'll expend, I think it's 10% more to build it a little bit faster. So this will cost us a little bit more, but let's go ahead and build that. In fact, yeah, we'll let that go. Okay, so we've covered about everything I want to cover in this overview, except for one last thing. How does combat actually work? Well, let's prepare our forces for war by putting them into ready mode. Actually, we also want to deploy all the forces that we have, because I think we have quite a few forces. We don't really want all these forces for sale anymore, because we're about to go to war. We could actually use them, especially these M1A2s. Those would be extremely useful. So I guess it's going to be too hard for me to click through all of this. Okay, we got there. And now let's hit sell, which will merge all units into one. You can see that the units that we have now selected are much less than the original. Because if there was a group of, let's say, 2 groups of about 300 M60A1s, when you put them ready for deploy, they merge into one group of 600 M60A1s. Now they're all ready for deploy. Let's go to deploy. Let's just select all our ground forces and deploy them to the capital, which is currently right now where our main force is. So now they're going to merge into there. For naval deployment, we actually have to just drag, click, and drag onto here. And that's fine. Naval units will appear there. You can see that although I dragged and clicked over here, they appeared here. Let's get them to actually merge with that unit, because we want all our naval units together. Okay, good. So now we take a look around. We see that for some reason, Iraq still hates us. This is the Saddam Hussein era, 2002, 2001, so I guess that's not too surprising. But I think it's time for us to declare war on a more nefarious enemy, one who has been sabotaging the US goals for basically the entirety of her existence as an independent nation. She's a constant threat to our borders, and I'm sure at this point you've guessed it. It's time for us to declare war on Canada. So, quick treaty, we'll just do request war and confirm. Now, obviously, Canada is a NATO member as well, so the entire NATO forces are going to be collapsing on us. It'll be a very tight naval battle because the US Navy versus every other NATO Navy. It's actually a pretty fair fight. Hopefully we can get a few more of our Tortuga classes in there, which I'm sure will tip the battle in our favor. But for now, let me just show you how combat works. So we're going to move, and I'm just going to tell you, combat is just a 1D line. You either move forces forward, or you move forces back. There's no height advantage or disadvantage. There's no flanking bonus. It's just either move forces forward or move them back. So it's very, very simple. Here we go. So let's engage the Canadian forces, and you can see, here's the battle on the bottom. This gray line, dark black line, whatever it is, indicates where the front is. And you can see that we're charging forward with our fighter aircraft, which makes sense that they're the fastest units. So this is where the speed modifiers and stuff goes in. So that was a very quick battle. We eliminated 16 of their guns very quickly, but now this is the real fight. You could employ different strategies here, but mainly I would say the main thing you want to do is move your fighter aircraft back, because unless you're fighting other fighter aircraft or attack aircraft, they're pretty weak. I even want to move my attack aircraft back because for some reason it appears in this game attack helicopters are the end-all be-all. In fact, a force of just attack helicopters and infantry seems to be all supreme. So in just that small amount of time, we've actually crushed the Canadian forces. Things might not be going as well for us in the naval front. So you can see that the main advantage we have here is that we have 17 aircraft carriers. Everything else that we have is probably already destroyed. I see that we don't have any attack submarines left, so those must have gotten left behind. Let's pull our ballistic subs back. I don't think that they're extremely useful in this kind of engagement. And basically we want the aircraft carriers to do most of the work here because they're the prize fighting unit. Unfortunately, they still have some anti-submarine warfare helicopters left too. Anyway, this is how the combat works. It's very simple. You move units forward or you move it back. That's the only thing you control. And you can see where the units are on this, although there is a second dimension to this, this just allows each different unit, like aircraft carriers, destroyers, frigates, etc., to be on its own vertical plane. Anyway, that's going to conclude this Let's Play video. This gameplay overview of Superpower 2. Overall, I just want to tell you that I really highly recommend this game. It's a lot of fun to play. It has a very realistic sandbox feel. You actually do make decisions where you feel like, okay, yeah, I feel like the US, I feel like I did balance the budget. I do feel proud of myself. Or I did make the resources a lot better. Or, legalizing drugs was a good decision. Or not, whatever. Not that I support that, I'm just saying. It's possible to view the different scenarios in this game. If you think that graphics are a little outdated, or perhaps you're waiting for a slightly better military option, you could also stay tuned for Superpower 3, which is currently under development. But thanks for watching this video, and take care.